Gerry Centrowitz. Gerry Centrowitz arrived the same year I did, fall of '74, and he himself would be the first to say that he got the short end of the Centrowitz gene pool, because his brother was American record holder at 5,000. Now his nephew has won the Olympic gold medal, and Gerry. No one was ever more self-deprecating than him.
That's right.
And he's made all kinds of jokes about where I guess the good Lord shorted him on talent as compared to the rest of his family. But Gerry was 10th man on a 10-man traveling squad when we were freshmen. I was 11th, so if I ran, it means someone got hurt if I went on the road. But Gerry then really had a couple of down years, but he came back in '77, really in pretty good shape. And looking at some of the photos of him, he really was lean. You can see it was fit, and was top 5 finisher that year on any number of meets that we ran in. And Gerry was always a good guy, and always again kind of had the cynical, dark humor that had us all entertained on the van rides and everything. And he's been back only a few times since then, but. Gerry, we wish he was here. Ron stayed close to Gerry through the years.
Hey, Tom?
Yes.
You just mentioned that 10-man traveling
Go ahead,
squad.
yeah.
There's a story about Tom, the 10-man traveling squad, that I think says a whole lot about Nick and Chris. In early October, we would go run the IU Invitational, and you could run 10 guys. And we had two track athletes, 2 Olympians who had arrived that fall. Bernd Herrmann from West Germany, who in '72 ran on the 4x400 West German relay team that medaled. And Richard Hopkins from Australia, who was a 100, 200 meter guy who had been on the Australian Olympic team. And Coach Bean, for whatever reason, made the decision that he was only going to take 8 runners to IU and take Richard and Bernd Herrmann just to give them a chance to get out of town. They'd just been here about 6 weeks, and when Chris Riddler saw that posted that only 8 were going and that those 2 were going, I remember he came to me and said, "What are we going to do about this?" And I said, "Well, I don't have the clout you and Nick have. What are you going to do about it?" And Tom didn't know it at the time, but Nick and Chris went into Coach Bean and said, "We've got guys who have been working hard, running 100 miles a week since the middle of August, who are our 9th and 10th runner. They go or we don't go." Now, they had the clout. I could have walked in, he would have said, "Stay home." But it to me, it was the essence of what Nick and Chris were all about. The comment earlier about, I think it was Steve made the comment about Nick at the race, knowing you by name, and they're cheering for you. It didn't matter where you were on the ladder, if you will. Nick was there to support you. And I always remember that, the 2 of them going into Coach Bean, and as a result, I believe Tom and Gerry, right?
No, I would correct him. Gerry would have gone anyway. What happened is Jaggers was injured.
That's right.
And I would be next man up.
You'd be next man up.
But then he was going to take 2 other guys.
So I just thought when you mentioned that about that 10-man travel squad, I always remember that from the fall of '74. That here you got the eventual national champion and a guy who finished 8th or 9th in the NCAA championship, I think Chris was.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they walk in and say, "No, our 9th and 10th guys are going with us to Bloomington, not 2 Olympians from another country."
Yeah, thank you.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's a great story, and it was so touching to me because, believe me, I was nobody. I was nobody. I was a 10-minute 2-miler in high school, walk on, and I had not done a thing in my life to deserve that kind of loyalty from teammates of that stature. So that touched me deeply, and it does to this day. And as I've said before, That was one interesting van ride from Bowling Green to Bloomington. I learned more than I wanted to learn that day. Anyway, thanks, Joe. That's a great story for me. It always has been. Then let me just okay, so let me turn to, this is more now getting into the guys that were the core freshman group that was most active in that year and the next year. Let me start off with Johnny Frazier, who we thought was going to be here until yesterday. And John was a freshman from West Virginia, and came in and was 5'4", weighed 115 pounds, just a little guy. And the thing about that freshman class, I think as freshmen want to do, you want to come in and prove yourself from the beginning. And I was not in good shape. That would be an understatement. I was not in good shape. And these guys were just going out on 14-mile runs, flying out the door and running their tails off. And I was back there wondering, what is going on here? But all of them in their own way, I think at different points, got burned out. I mean, they ran their legs off, and by October, these guys were dragging. And I remember Coach Hessel saying to me, what do you think, how's Frazier doing? And I said, I don't know. And he said, I haven't seen that kid smile in 3 weeks. I mean, but it was a great story because he was really kind of falling off the chart. The meets we were running, he wasn't in the top 5, top 7 sometimes. The OVC championships held here. He was the first man home for Western. All of a sudden, Johnny Frazier just emerged out of whatever. Maybe he's got his legs back under him, and he was the 15th man and our first man home. And that was really a show of his talent. Two things about him, since this is really being made for the record. If you look in the scrapbook, there was an article that was done on me during the homecoming edition of the Herald, and because I was the team captain, and they did this little story on me, and in the story, and this ended up being like a sub headline on the next page, Johnny Frazier told them that I was the father figure for the freshmen. Now, if you know how tough it was for me with a dating life on campus already, literally every girl I knew would come up to me and say, "Hi, Dad," and I can thank Johnny Frazier for that. The girls on campus were calling me Dad for the rest of the year. But the other thing I didn't find out until last year, Johnny only was here one semester, came back in January for a week or two and left. Ended up running in West Virginia. But what I did not know till last year, and my story is one of getting into the marathon, and Coach Hessel told me in '76, after I kind of had a breakthrough year for cross country, if you do everything right, you can qualify for the 1980 Olympic trials, which I did, and to do that, it took 4 years of everything. In 1979, I ran 4,600 miles. Okay, that took all of my effort for 4 years to run a 2:20 marathon to qualify. Johnny Frazier leaves here after one semester, goes home and runs 2:19. You think that kid didn't have talent? Holy smoke, a 2:19 marathon after one semester in college. So John was a huge talent, and we'd be entertained if he was here to say a few words. So we were sorry that we missed him. The other guy I want to talk about who's not here, and I think his wife was planning to be here on Zoom, first personally, then by Zoom, is his wife, Chris Curl. As probably almost everyone here knows, Pat died. Pat died in 2014. It doesn't seem that long.
Yeah. But
Pat was a character. He transferred in also from Clackamas Community, where Steve Carrick came from, out in Oregon. And Pat was a guy that would do anything to get a laugh out of somebody. He was a bit of a flake. In the OVC championship meet here, which we hosted that year, Bob Swan, our leader, went down. He slipped on the wet grass, went down, wrenched his back. He couldn't run. Pat loved telling this story. Coach Hessel said, "Pat, you're on."
Bob was there for the story being done,
Okay, as
being
was
made.
As was Tim Brooks, I believe.
Tim. you
Oh,
were
Tim
there
was too?
Yeah.
That morning?
Yeah.
Because we did something,
Yeah,
real
so
smart that
the
morning.
point is, these guys, knowing that they were gonna be spectators, did some drinking that morning.
Yeah, before we went to the meet.
Before they went to the meet, and Pat shows up, ready to watch the meet, and suddenly he's told, Pat, you're on. You're replacing Bob. Pat, and this can only happen to a flake, Pat runs the best race of his life. Pat was the fourth guy home for Western, and loved telling the story that his greatest race was after 8 beers or something. But a story, one story I love telling about Pat, it was somewhere probably in late September. We've done a 14-mile Sunday morning run, and we're all coming in straggling at different times, and we're out at Cumberland Trace School, I guess, where we used to run from. And we're still waiting for other guys to come in, and Pat is standing off on his own with his T-shirt. We had the typical Saturday night party at Tony's house, right? So some beverage was drank the night before, and Pat's standing there just wringing out his T-shirt, just 1 inch at a time, just slowly wringing it out. And I think, what is he doing? Curl's just. And I walk around, we're cooling off. I look over, Pat's another 6 inches down on it, he's just standing like in a puddle of perspiration as he's wringing out every little inch of his T-shirt that he just sweat in. Finally, I walk down and say, Curl, what are you doing? And he looks up at me, looks away, sees Coach Hessel's out of earshot, and he says, beer, anyone? But that was Pat. He would do anything for a cheap laugh, but he was a lovable guy, and we lost a good soul 7 years ago. Yes. So let me turn back to some people who are here. Well, now let's start with Bob Swan, who's not here. Bob was a freshman from England, this freshman class of 77. Bob clearly had a lot of talent. As a freshman, he finished 9th at the Indiana Invitational. The most memorable thing about Bob, I don't know that I remember anybody coming in, and I feel like I stayed here a total of 7 years, so I was here 74 through 81. I saw the best of both sides of that era. I came just at the right time to see everything. I never saw a guy on this team come in and just with his personality impact the campus like he did. He had that grin from ear to ear. He was always smiling, and everybody seemed to know him within about a month. And he really just was one of the all-time good guys and a great personality that, like Chris Payne, like a few others, the injury bug just kept getting him at the wrong time. And again, he had to miss the conference championship because he hurt himself 30 minutes before. And he only stayed 3 semesters. And the next year he came back, was in really good shape, got injured again. I think it was a deep sprain or something that wasn't healing very quickly. And he decided, by about Thanksgiving or so, that he wasn't going to come back. Mm-hmm. And that was, I think, really a tragedy for the team because of what Bob brought. And I realized then, the guy who came here and just always grinned from ear to ear, I realized I hadn't seen him smile for 3 months. He was so unhappy being injured, and he couldn't even go to the meets. It was too painful for him to go to some of the meets even to cheer the guys on. So Bob was a great guy in a short career here and ran a few really good races.
Did he ever run after that?
Yeah, he ran
Yes.
pretty well.
Yeah.
He ran 28.
Tim and I went to England in '82, and we visited Bob over there. And he had I remember saying he ran a sub 50-minute 10-mile, and he had done some good running. And then when he was in really good shape, he broke his ankle. And
You're right. He was a super nice guy.
Yeah. So Bob was a guy that never really took off here, and it's a shame. And So I think I've touched on everybody that's not here. So let me turn to the people that are here. And let's just start, Mike. I'm going to go to Mike Clay. Mike, there is no doubt, Mike, I'm sure I'm right about this. Mike had the most underrated, unappreciated career achievements for a cross-country runner of anybody that's ever been through the program. Mike came in, did some good running as a freshman, did some poor running as a freshman. A very wobbly first semester, had some really good runs. But in the course, by the time he was a senior, he was one of the 5 guys that ran to a 5-way perfect score, winning the OVC cross-country championship. And Tim Brooks figured out, and we think this is probably right, Mike is the only American that, for Western Kentucky, scored in the NCAA meet 3 years in a row. We've thought through all the Americans, and we couldn't think of anybody else that did that. So Mike did it very quietly. Mike wasn't a loudmouth. His personality got kind of lost sometimes in the crowd. But Mike had an impressive career. And the other thing, I want to say 2 things about the marathon, since that's dear to my heart. You know, when we were looking at trying to qualify, Neil was, of course, a valiant training partner. When we were looking to qualify for the Olympic trials in 1980, one option was to go to the New Orleans Marathon, the Mardi Gras, where the word was most of the time there's a tailwind and you're running 24 miles across Lake Pontchartrain with a tailwind. And I didn't want to go. I didn't feel good about this. That seemed to delegitimize it if you could do it. I ended up going to Oak Ridge, where it never snows that side of the mountains in February, and I was able to qualify there. But I set all that up because Mike went to the Mardi Gras Marathon a couple years later, and that year there was a headwind. And Mike led the race, I believe, 24 miles into that headwind until 1 or 2 guys maybe overtook him. But it was a classic Mike Clay bulldog moment. Just put your head down and just keep charging. And Mike ultimately, a couple years later, I didn't know this till yesterday, he was in medical school and he ran a 2:20 marathon and just missed the standard for the 84 trials. So Mike was a relentless bulldog as a runner, and I probably can't say enough about him. Mike, come on up. Have your say here. You had a great career, and as I said, I think it was underappreciated.
Yeah, I came from Florida with Tim. Panhandle had a really good coach, and we watched Nick Rose and the Western team, and so I, just like most of the people that came here, that legacy was what I wanted to be part of. So I came up here, walked on, knew that with running against those kind of guys, that hey, I'm going to be back to back. Worked hard just to be around those guys and to run the best I could. And my tradition of running started with in high school, continued to Western, and I still run now. Don't compete anymore. After that 220, I thought it's just going to get slower. So I retired then and spent my time competing with the Air Force mile and a half to maintain my fitness score. That was about it for competitive racing. But enjoyed my time, enjoyed running with everybody that was here, and valued those friendships and all those people I met, and to be able to run, and even the workouts were phenomenal. Not just the race, our workouts. We went out, and some of those workouts were incredible. And just to feel that good and run that fast, even in a workout, was just awesome. And so, yeah, it was an awesome 4 years, and I'll never forget it.
All right, thanks, Mike. James, you and I both had our say, even though I'm doing a lot of talking here.